Welcome back, Richard. Today we are going to deal with an emotion, an issue that, my goodness, has been a major issue that we've seen in our clinic and with patients and just with people in our families. Don't to mention a lot in recent.
We'll right by that one, right?
Right, just slide that one real quick.
Friends and family.
That's right. But we're going to talk about anger today.
Right. Yeah, we've talked about emotions before. We talked about emotions and feelings, and but there seems to be a lot of anger going around these days. I mean, there's this undercurrent of anger, right. And I thought, well, let's take another look at this emotion in particular. Yeah. And so we found a definition of anger, and I think there's a couple of key points that we want to make. One is anger is one of those emotional responses we have. Mm-hmm. The event can be an external event that something's happening in our environment, or it can be an internal feeling that we have, right? Pain or anxiety or anguish or loneliness. And so it's our emotional response to some event, but it's usually an event that we judge to be a threat, mm-hmm. or a violation or an injustice. Right. We tend to look at it that way. And anger is associated with the fight or flight response. Right. So anger is one of those emotions that we have we've hung on to over time because it produces arousal, mm-hmm. that becomes part of the fight or flight response.
Well, and in that sense, anger is not just an emotional response, but it's also an adaptive response. There's a lot of, from an evolutionary perspective, there was a lot of usefulness for it because it protects us from danger and it helps us, sort of, as you said, raises that arousal, raises that, mm-hmm. sense of awareness, that conscientiousness of what's going on around you, mm-hmm. so that you can defend yourself if you need to, or you can get to safety if you need to.
That's right. All these emotions that we have, and we've said this in previous podcasts, they're part of us for a reason.
Right.
Anger, these emotions have some adaptive utility. Okay.
Yeah.
And the other thing we know about anger is that when we talk about anger, we're talking about a range of feelings that everything from a little irritability or a minor annoyance, mm-hmm. the traffic light isn't changing quickly enough, to a full-fledged rage response, right. Where we're really, really angry. And so it's an emotional response, it's an adaptive response, there's a range of anger from mild to severe. And finally, anger is something that we learn. Our anger response is learned, right. And we usually learn it in our family of origin. Right. And as we were preparing for this, you made an excellent point. We learn how to manage our anger by watching others. We model, right. the behavior of others, and we internalize it. And sometimes we watch positive examples. Mm-hmm. This is how my uncle would manage his anger. If he had an annoyance or a problem, and I would watch him deal with that in a certain way. On the other hand, we learn from negative examples.
Right.
I never want to do that, right? I don't ever want to react that way. So we learn from both positive exemplars and negative exemplars. Right. So it's an emotional response, adaptive response, a range of responses, and it's something that we learned usually in our family of origin.
Right. And that learning component is oftentimes, as you suggested, in the way that we respond to things, right. how we manage or respond or behave when we're angry. Right. But we also, to some extent, we learn what makes us angry.
Yeah.
And people become really agitated over very minor things, and if you sometimes digging around in the past a little bit, you can see where some of that comes from. Right. So we learn what makes us angry, but we also learn the way that we manage it, and there's a variety of ways that we do manage anger, and one, of course, is by expressing it sort of outwardly. Right. And so we may be, sometimes people who are angry become aggressive, and they will, right. verbally or physically assault or aggress someone else. because out of anger.
Right.
And another way is, and sometimes this is seen as a little maybe more adaptive,
Right.
but being assertive.
Right.
You know, when we look at some of our scales, our tests that we use to assess people's personality or just temperament and things like that, you know, they may score high on the anger scale and maybe even the aggression scale, and you think, wow, that person never reports any anger or any aggression, but they're very assertive. They're
Right.
very, you know, they are outspoken and they express themselves, you know, very confidently, and you know, they don't shy back away from any type of, you know, confrontation, you know, thinking about like the business world and things like that.
Right.
So sometimes anger expresses itself positively, you know, without any intent for harm, but as through assertion.
That's right. Yeah, when we talk about our anger response, you can either express it, or you can suppress it, or you
Right.
can calm it. There are three large categories: expression, suppression, and calming.
Right.
And these two A words, you can express your anger either aggressively,
Hmm.
or you can do it assertively. And you tend to express your anger assertively. You manage it and you communicate your anger without doing any harm. Okay, it's you're going to feel anger. It's how you express the anger, and you can
Right.
either do it aggressively or assertively. And we
Right.
would encourage people to learn how to do it assertively,
Right.
because the other alternative is you suppress your anger, and that's usually not good. Okay, uh, but again, there's a positive and a negative way to do it. There was a program in elementary schools years ago that, in fact, you were involved in that Stop and Think
Hmm.
program. You were there then, right? When
Right.
we were doing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, when the school psych program. And in suppressing anger, you can use a stop and think approach where you convert your anger into something positive. So you pause, you get your anger under control, and you convert it.
Yeah.
But if you suppress it, and if you only suppress it,
Right.
then it turns inward, and then it can do damage, because then you're going to convert it into something more negative.
Right. And oftentimes that's when one turns it onto themselves, and
Right.
you know, that's where we get some of those internalizing
Mhm.
disorders like anxiety or depression and things like that, because you know, whereas um, you know, we readily recognize aggression and anger towards other people. When
Right.
somebody is angry and aggressive towards themselves,
Mhm.
oftentimes that manifests through depression, well, primarily depression, but also anxiety as well. Um, Now, you also mentioned the third one, which is calming,
Right.
and that there's again a variety of ways to do that. And while calming your anger is oftentimes very positive, you know, you know, you're trying to pull down that anger,
Mhm.
to manage it. It's sort of like you're dealing with the internal processes and you're dealing with the way that you're thinking about things. We do also have to be careful that by calming it, that we're not avoiding issues that need to be dealt with.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, one of the
Good.
rating scales that we use is the anger expression scale,
Right.
and one of the things it looks on it is calming, and people often think, well, I'm really high on the calming, that's really good, so I'm going to score really high on all the calming.
Right.
But the problem with that is that would suggest that, you know, you're at risk for people walking all over you, and that you don't stand up for yourself, and that you're not assertive in the way that we were talking about assertiveness in just a moment ago, and that leads to other problems.
Right. That's right. So our response, when we feel anger, our response is, it really depends on the event.
Right.
You know, there's everything from a minor irritation to a major confrontation. So the nature of the event will um, influence our response. Our basic temperament. There are people who have low frustration tolerance. Parents will frequently bring children to us who have a very low frustration tolerance, but we know many adults who have a low frustration tolerance. And you look at them and say, wow, that's not that big a deal,
Right.
you know, and yet there's this big reaction. So there are people, because of their basic temperaments, who have a low frustration tolerance. And then the third factor is, how did we learn to express our anger in our family of origin? So there's these three things that influence our response.
Right. So we kind of started podcast out talking about anger as a natural, normal,
Right.
adaptive thing. But let's realize, of course, that anger can be a good thing, or it can be a bad thing.
Right.
When we express our anger outwardly, with little regard for who's around us and what else is going on, not only do we run the risk of affecting things socially, interpersonally, but it's really not good for us physically either, our physical health.
That's right. We often forget that this anger response is both physiological.
Right.
There are things that happen in our body, as well as our mental health, and we forget that, you're damaging your body. The anger produces hormones that damage the body.
I think that's a great point, because I think that we forget that with everything. Remember the movie Patch Adams, when they were talking about Hunter Adams, Dr. Adams, and the Gesundheit Institute, and all that he was doing. And he was talking about laughter and happiness and just bringing that joy to lives. That was one of the things that he talked about in some of his research, and lots of other people's research. They've talked about these positive effects of happiness and laughing and things like that. Every emotion that we have, it has a cascade of chemicals that are released in our bodies that are a result of it, whether it's happiness or anger or sadness or anxiety or any of them. They all are manifest chemically in our body. And so, yeah, I mean, when you have an emotion like anger that can make you not feel so great, we could sort of relate that to, there's probably chemicals going on in your body that's not going to make you feel so great.
Right. I think of those college students frequently, mostly college students, some high school students, who come in and say, well, no, I have to wait until the last minute. I have to feel a lot of pressure before I can study. And I think you're putting yourself under, that's called stress.
Right.
And the stress response, I mean, I understand what you're saying is that you need to feel pressure to do your work, but that stress response also produces hormones that are going to damage your body, your joints, your brain, your lungs, your everything, your circulation.
Right.
Stress isn't good for you. It might get you a better grade on a test, but you're doing some damage to your body. So be careful.
Well, and that's often why they also say, and then after the test, I can't remember anything else after it. I can't remember that stuff, a week later. Everything from that test, I've totally forgotten.
Guess why?
You're right. You didn't store it into long-term memory the way that you needed to. So
because of the very stress that you were trying to produce so that you could do the studying.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So anger can be a bad thing. It can lead to not just interpersonal problems, but it can lead to physiological problems with our body, mental health problems, of course. It makes it difficult to think. A lot of people, when they're angry, they can't rationalize, they can't problem solve, and once all of those chemicals and all of those emotions die down, then we start to hear about regret and remorse, and they feel bad for what they've done during the times when they were angry.
Yeah, I don't think anybody has ever said, well, I feel much better about myself now that I've made a complete fool of myself by screaming and yelling at my kid. Those are the things that parents regret. Every parent's regret, every partner's regret.
Right.
Every employee's regret. Well, that was stupid. So I think that the excessive expression of anger usually results in regret.
Right.
By the person who expressed it. Right.
Absolutely. And but anger can also be a good thing.
Right.
When we've talked before about like anxiety and things like that, one of the things we said is that, stress and worry are physiological and psychological cues that we need to do something. Well, anger is a cue that we need to do something as well. It's a cue that there's some type of problem that needs to be solved, because that problem is creating that, maybe that sense of injustice, that sense of wrongness that you were talking about earlier. And it leads to a recognition that, man, I need to do something to change this.
Right. And I think that's the segue into what I would consider the second half of this podcast, is that like every emotion, anger has an adaptive component.
Mhm.
It's informative. Our emotions are informative,
Right.
and anger is no exception. When you get angry, your your body, your mind, yourself is trying to inform you that
Right.
something's going on, and you need to listen to those prompts from your body, from your mind, that that this is a feeling that you need to recognize and
Right.
you need to do something about. So
A-
there's a little bit of work to be done.
Absolutely. And, recognizing that anger is just part of who we are. We can't avoid it. It's part of, it's just part of our biology.
It is.
Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
as we say, it's baked into our DNA. You know,
absolutely.
and it is because anger was usually a response to danger.
Right.
I mean, we felt a threat. I mean, when do we get angry? We get angry when we feel threat,
Right.
when we feel abused or taken advantage of, and so anger is a signal that maybe there's some danger in the environment. Okay,
Right.
so it's just part of our DNA.
Right. As we've said, it kind of motivates us to action, motivates us to do something. And it's a drive. A lot of times when we feel angry, we feel more energy and we feel um, more more of a tendency to go and move into action.
That's right.
Um, of course, the problem now, though, is that whereas historically, that
Right.
was a very survival based issue, now there are things that sort of we feel threaten our survival, but they're not tangible. They're not, a wild beast or something. They're not an enemy of some sort. It's just life. It's the things that we see on the news that are happening, thousands of miles away,
Right.
but we get angry about it because we connect some way that it's, again, we think about injustice. That was one of the things that causes anger. We see these things happening, things that in the past we would have never known about,
Right. Hmm.
but that are happening, and here we are getting angry about them, but we have absolutely no ability to do anything about it.
That's right. If you can, just in your mind, go back to a primitive culture 10,000 years ago. Um, we got angry in response to some real threat,
Right.
either threat from an animal or threat from the gods or threat from another person. So we had this mechanism called, we call it anger, which was our response to a threat. Well, that's good if it's really life threatening, but when your child gets a C on a test, it still triggers that primordial response in you, but it doesn't deserve that.
Right, because your immediate thought is the future.
Right.
Again, something very intangible, something very abstract, something uncertain.
Right.
You're seeing that C and you're thinking about, okay, what does that mean for this year? What does that mean for high school graduation? What does that mean for college? What does that mean for his career? We're creating this entire world
Mhm.
that's eliciting and in many ways tries to justify this sense of anger that we're
Right.
experiencing over a letter on a piece of paper.
Yeah. Or one of the examples that you frequently use is you ask your child to clean his bedroom. It's time to clean your bedroom, and you get that sigh of disgust, like, oh
Right.
God, and then the parent reacts angrily because it feels like they're being disrespected.
Right.
Okay, but you're disrespecting me, and so yeah, if if you're living in a cave, 10,000 years ago, it might have been important for that to occur, but that's not the case now. But it produces the same emotion. It produces anger.
Right. Yeah, because when we think about situations like that, it does make me crazy a little bit because um I don't like cleaning my room either. I don't. Who does? And so if the kid sighs a little bit about it, who can, as long as they're going to do it. I mean,
Of
that's
course
that's
they're
the
going to
goal,
sigh,
right? I,
right?
I
We're,
sigh. Oh gosh,
oh God, I got to clean my room. Yeah.
I, yeah, I didn't. When I got up this morning, I had a couple of dishes in the sink. I was, gotta wash the dishes.
Takes you 5 minutes, right?
Right. It just took a couple minutes, but if my mom was here, she'd be screaming at me because I was sighing because I was asked to clean out wash the dishes. But we have these emotional reactions, these anger-based reactions over things that are insignificant, and so we don't live in tranquil times.
We don't live in a danger zone.
Right.
Most of us don't live in a danger zone.
We don't live in a danger zone, yet we are constantly bombarded with these threats.
Right. What we feel.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And it's still going to produce this same response. I mean, that's just the way we're built.
Right.
It's not, you tell your son to turn off his video game and go to bed, and he's, he starts to grumble and mumble. And you start to feel like you're being challenged. Okay. Well, when you're being challenged, you get aroused. And part of that arousal is anger.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah.
So,
and let's be honest, sometimes other people have the goal of making you angry. And so when you show that anger, it's like, okay, that's pretty good. I'll do that again.
I can push that button whenever I want. Right?
That's right. So when we think about some of these sort of non-specific, abstract, intangible things that make us angry, we don't live in tranquil times. Gallup, who does these, big surveys and polls and stuff, they wrote in 2020, the world was a sadder, angrier, and more worried and more stressed out place than it has been any time in the past 15 years. So just about since the turn of the century, 2020 was one of the one of the years with the most anger, most sadness, and most worry. And that should make sense in part because of the pandemic and everything. But when you think about everything, how angry do people get because the grocery store is out of toilet paper?
Right.
I mean,
we forgot about toilet paper. Yes.
People get angry about that. It's like, what is anger going to do for you with that?
Right. No, it's really true. I forgot about the turn of the century. Remember, we thought the world was going to come to an end,
right,
on 2000, and then we had 2001.
Right.
We had 9/11, and now we have the pandemic. So yeah, there's been this movement, this movement to anger, and people are just angry. I mean, I've had relatives come up to me and say, "Hey, my dad's really, her dad's a little bit older now. He's probably in his 70s or 80s, and she said he's really getting angry. That sort of that curmudgeon, the old curmudgeon." But and she offered several explanations for it. But even family members are concerned about this undercurrent of anger that they're seeing, and we see it all the time.
Right.
All these shootings and the gang violence. Not the mass shootings, but the gang violence that we see. And so we just seem to be living in angrier times. The war in Ukraine. I mean, it's pretty. So we have things. So we get irritated by waiting in line in a grocery store.
Right.
They have these self-checkout things now. They have kiosks at fast food restaurants and self-checkouts at retail stores.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I guess it's going to take some getting used to. I won't use a kiosk. If I have to use it, I'll leave and go someplace where I don't have to use it. But I don't know, there's something that rankles me about that stuff. I get angry when I see a kiosk, right? It produces anger in me. So and same with self-checkout. I said, wait a minute, it's like pumping your own gas. And so
you still pump your own gas though, right?
Oh, don't have a choice unless you go. There's one place you can go that they will. Where was it?
Don't tell me. I don't know. I don't want to know where there's a full service gas station.
There's a full service. They actually will go, they go back to 1955 and treat you like a customer. So instead of part-time employee. So you go to these lines and you have to wait in line. Okay. Or bad drivers, people who drive who are inconsiderate, or what our kids do well. Right. Our children, our partners, our bosses. All those people are sources of anger. And then, of course, we had the whole mask thing, where you got tired of wearing your mask. But there's also this constant barrage of what we call news programs. And I don't care which side of the aisle you want to be on, right. But these news programs that are meant to stoke your anger.
Right.
I mean, there's no other word for it. they want to keep you, the goal of TV is to keep you in front of the screen.
Right.
It's like the goal of video games, the goal of social media. Well, the goal of TV, what advertisers want is to keep that audience glued to TV. And so we have found ways to keep the audience glued.
Right.
And one of the ways is to elicit anger in the viewer. You'll go back over and over and over again.
And I think that it's such an interesting phenomenon, because I don't think most people think about it this way, but we always want to feel something. We always want to feel some emotion.
Feel alive, right?
Sometimes we want to feel happiness, and so we watch things that make us laugh, and we watch things that we enjoy. But sometimes when we can't find that, or when we just aren't in the mood for that, we look for things that make us angry, things that elicit a visceral, intense emotional response to something. I was talking to a patient one day, and we were talking about crying. And I said, it was a kid, and I said, believe it or not, his mom was sitting next to him. I said, believe it or not, there'll be a time when you grow up where you're going to watch a movie just because it makes you sad. And he's like, I can't believe that. I would never even think that. I said, ask mom.
His mother believes it.
And she's like, we do. And because we just want to feel something. And sometimes there's a particular emotion that we're looking for. But many people, they're just so unhappy with so much in their life right now that they are just drawn to this sense of anger, and they just look for opportunities and look for sources to stoke that anger.
Right. And that's getting us to this next step. Okay?
Right.
So the problems begin when it comes to anger, because I think now we've made the point that anger is adaptive, necessary, ubiquitous. We all get angry, but we get angry for good reasons, but we are obligated to manage it. The problems begin to emerge when anger takes control of us.
Right.
That's what we have to be careful of, because that's when we get aggression. APA the American Psychological Association has done studies, and they report that 90% of aggressive incidents are preceded by this feeling of anger.
Well, and you see that people are like, well, of course, why not? Why wouldn't it? But think about what that means. It's like, what that means is all these things that you do, and all these ways that you experience anger, your risk of an aggressive behavior is significantly increased. You're not going to become angry after watching a comedy. You're going to become angry after watching 3 hours of a news program that's just talking about the things that really tick you off,
that really make you angry.
Yeah,
that are meant to make you angry. Right. Because anger motivates you to action.
Absolutely. As we've said already. So yeah, it makes sense that, when we allow the anger to take control, or in other words, when we lose control of our anger, we are at significant risk for acting out in ways that cause problems.
That's right. And so there's this Chinese proverb that goes something like, if you're patient in one moment of anger, you will escape 100 days of sorrow. And we all know what that means, but that's easier said than done.
Sure.
The idea of being patient in this moment of anger is for many of us, a very difficult thing to achieve. Mm-hmm. I've been working on it for 40 years. That moment, that trying to develop patience in that one moment of anger. Right. So I'm the first to acknowledge it's much easier said than done. Yeah. So there's this article that appeared in Psychological Today by Monica Brahmani. She's a clinical psychologist in Toronto, Canada. And the title of it is Understanding and Processing Anger. And she gives us a sort of a nice shorthand way of managing our anger, of getting to this moment of patience.
Right. And one of the big points there is that, anger tends to show up when we feel like we need to defend ourselves. And so if we think about, what the things that we said earlier about, anger shows up when we feel that we're in danger, or when we feel an injustice or something like that. Okay. In other words, we're become angry because we need to defend ourselves, because we feel as though we've been done wrong, or somebody's harming us or something like that.
Right.
the problem, as she points out, is that acting on that,
Mhm.
either acting out or holding it in, sort of expressing it or suppressing it, as we talked about earlier, neither of those really satisfies that problem.
That's right. And that's the essential problem here, is that we tend to get angry when we feel that we need to defend ourselves. And yet the typical expression of anger, that you either express it or you hold it in, doesn't satisfy that need.
Right.
Okay. And so what she says, and she even has a word for it, she says that anger, the problem here is that anger obscures our true feelings.
Right.
And she calls anger a blanket emotion because it covers, it obscures, it hides our true feelings. And as you might imagine, her goal is to get us to identify what the real feelings are.
Right. So let's just as a very quick example, if somebody pulls out in front of us while we're driving,
Right.
and we experience road rage, anger, right?
Right.
Well, what is the real emotion? Well, the real emotion there is fear. You thought you were going to get into a car accident. You
Right.
thought, and so you're afraid. You're because you could have been injured. You could have, had, lots, in the very least, lots of car repair payments. You're also frustrated, that somebody would be, but there's all these other emotions, but we express it just through anger, because as she said, anger is this blanket emotion that goes over everything. And so we don't pay attention to the fear or to these other things that we may be feeling at the same time.
Right. I think that road rage is probably one of the easiest ways to understand this concept that she's trying to propose, because you're absolutely right. Your initial response is really a fear response.
Right.
I mean, the first thing that happens is fear.
Right.
Then you get to anger with the person who did that.
Right.
Then the next step, but what you're most aware of is anger.
Right.
With the person. And so you express your anger. And we know how people express road rage.
Right.
Usually it's digital, or, but we express our anger at the other person.
Right.
But that's not where we should be. What she's saying is we should go back to the original response and deal with that, which is fear.
Right. In that example, yeah.
That's right, because the anger, that's the blanket emotion. That's what she means by a blanket emotion. The anger covers up how we really feel. Right. I had kids in the back seat and they could have been hurt. That's what scared me.
Right. Absolutely. And so, she kind of creates this mental image of, all of these different emotions kind of get dropped into like a funnel. And at the bottom of the funnel, it just comes out as anger.
That's right. No matter what we're initially feeling.
Right.
He said it all gets dumped into this funnel and it comes out as anger. But
right.
That's not what we should be dealing with.
Right. And so she suggests that we sort of lift the blanket, sticking with the metaphor, and look for those true feelings that we're really experiencing. And if we did that, then we would see that, okay, what I'm really dealing with is fear. Man, that really frightened me because I thought that the person was going to hit us. And I thought we were going to, we could have gotten really seriously injured.
Right.
That processes the issue and the situation very differently than just saying, oh, that guy, I can't believe he did that.
Right. Or I'm angry. The emotion I'm dealing with now is anger.
Right.
When the real emotion is somewhere else. It's something else. And so what she has us do, what she does in her approach with anger, is that she'll have a person practice going through this. Okay. That you can do it. You can learn how to manage your anger by practicing scenarios that you come up with in your head. You say, okay, recall a time when you got angry.
Okay.
And so remember then, so you recall, then the next step is to remember that anger is secondary. I love the approach.
Yeah.
I love this idea because people will come to us and say, well, I'm angry, or I'm upset, or I feel a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And inevitably, I want to say to them, what is it about you
Mm-hmm.
that makes you feel this way.
Right.
Let's not talk about the other person. Let's dig deeper into you. Let's get to the core of who you are so
Right.
that we understand this better. It doesn't matter what the other person did.
Right.
What is it about you? And it's difficult for us to go into ourselves, to dig into ourselves at that depth, because you're admitting things about yourself that often are very difficult to admit.
Absolutely. And another way to think about it, and another way that I use with patients is, I guess we'll stick with the road rage example, but they'll say, oh, well, it just really made me so angry.
Yeah.
And you say, why did it make you angry? Well, I had kids in the car, and they could have, if they would have, he almost made me run off the road, and I could have gotten into an accident. Okay. Well, is that anger or is that fear? Is that anger, or can you think of another emotion that you were probably feeling at the same time because you were concerned that this could have happened? And we can use that, because oftentimes when we think about why are you angry, that's going to start breaking it down to, okay, now I have to look at the real trigger for this anger. Right. And when I look at the trigger, then I can start to understand a little bit more about, what the core emotion was.
That's right. And it speaks to that issue of, she made me angry, so I had to, whatever. Right. Okay. I had one of the first, in the beginning of my career, I was probably my second or third year of practice. And this 16-year-old boy came in with his mother, and he had hit her. He had assaulted his mother. And the two of them were sitting there, and he said, well, she made me angry, I had to hit her. And I was stunned because this 16-year-old boy is saying, well, she made me angry. So he justified hitting his mother, physically assaulting her. She made me angry. At that moment, we got to talk about not what your mother did.
Right.
It doesn't matter what she did. We have to talk about you. What is it about you that you take this aggressive approach when you have these feelings? And it begins with, what is the real feeling?
Right.
Because he wasn't identifying his real feeling.
Right.
And he was justifying his maladaptive behavior by putting it on somebody else. I said, no, that's not her. This is about you.
Right. And this approach, and as we, another link in the show notes is to this APA article about controlling anger. What we're talking a lot of here is a particular strategy called cognitive restructuring. It's sort of taking the situation and just sort of processing it differently cognitively, so that you can break it down and you can sort of picture it and process it differently. There are a variety of ways to manage anger, and cognitive restructuring is one way. Right. It's often difficult for people who aren't accustomed to it. It's difficult for them to do on their own at the beginning. That's why we work through it, therapeutically. But once you kind of get the hang of it, you can do it on your own anytime, and you can do it with other emotions as well.
It's a skill that you learn about and you practice it and you get better. And it's something you can, as you say, you do it on your own. Okay? Yeah. So when we talk about this blanket, anger is a blanket emotion, we want to uncover our true emotion. And then the next step is, so the third step in her approach, she says, recall when you were angry, remember that it's secondary. Anger is secondary, it's a blanket emotion. What are you really feeling? And then the third step is, what else could you have done? And we do that all the time with children who express anger as rage attacks, okay? Or they become physically aggressive, and we say, okay, what else could you have done?
Right.
Okay? And that's what we want to do with ourselves, is think about times when you were angry, and then get yourself to a point where, what else could I have done? And then you give yourself an opportunity to react in a more adaptive way.
Right.
So there are, in this last article, there are several ways, 6 or 7 ways of managing your anger. One is relaxation. We all know about that, deep breathing. What you're doing is you're bringing your body, you're aroused physiologically, and you're reducing your arousal so you can think more clearly. And the second is cognitive restructuring, which you already talked about.
Yeah.
We're going to give you get the third one, because that's how you manage your anger.
Right. Through problem solving. And I because again, if we think about anger as a cue that there's something that needs to, some issue, some problem that needs to be resolved, then we can step back and we can work through it. Again, it's partially cognitive restructuring because you're thinking, okay, why is this making me feel this way? Where is the miscommunication? Problem solving works especially with interpersonal issues, because you're talking to your spouse or your partner, and it's getting to a point where you're really not communicating, or you're not, things aren't going well in the discussion, and you start getting frustrated and you start getting angry. And a lot of times people will just continue down that path of anger when, if we pause for just a second and say, man, clearly there is something going on, because what I'm trying to communicate, my partner is not getting it. And okay, so step back and say, you know what, I'm starting to get really frustrated because I'm not understanding what I'm saying, what I'm saying that's different, or what I'm saying that's not coming across the way that I'm intending, because we're not hearing each other. Right. And so let's step back. Okay, so what is the problem? Right? Why is that problem there? And then how do we resolve that problem? And so we work through that problem, that simple problem solving strategy. And many times that helps. But the challenge with that is it requires, and I'm going to throw out another trigger word for some people. It requires vulnerability. You have to be willing to say, man, I'm really trying, but I'm not doing a very good job of explaining myself right now. And, can you help me understand where the miscommunication is? Or can we pause for just a second so we can figure this out? Because I really don't want to I don't want to be angry, because that's not going to help us solve these issues.
Right. And so with problem solving, sometimes you problem solve and it's just you're alone, something. Right. You're putting together a piece, it's late on Christmas Eve and you're putting together a bicycle, and you're getting angry because the directions don't make, or IKEA furniture, the directions don't make any sense. And you're convinced that they've forgotten to include one of the pieces, because you just can't figure out how this goes together.
You forgot that you missed that little image in the top corner that says that you're supposed to flip it over. I didn't know I was supposed to flip it over.
Right. And so rather than getting angry, because then your abilities are going to decline because you're angry and you're aroused. So when you get aroused, you blood gets shunted from your brain, and you sort of get stupid, okay, because you don't have enough fuel in your brain. That's what anger does to you. And so you get angry. But you're also, when you're trying to solve a problem with another person, whether it's a coworker or a boss, but typically it's a partner, and many times it's a child or a sibling, and you're trying to solve a problem, that requires a kind of communication that most of us aren't good at, especially when we get angry. Okay? And we tend to use words like, first of all, we tend to blame others. I'm angry because of what you did. Okay, so first of all, you assign blame. And then we begin using words like you always, you never, okay? And we begin to use words that carry an impact that we may or may not really mean. Certainly it's going to get in the way of solving the problem.
Absolutely. And so that's why, again, a strategy for managing anger is to step back and try to get back to that base communication. Man, I'm really not saying things the way that I'm meaning to say them.
I'm just not getting it across.
Yeah. And this is a place where, another strategy like humor can come in.
Right.
And you can say, man, I don't know what's going on. I'm really getting upset. I'm really getting angry, but I'm just saying stupid stuff. I don't even know what I'm saying, because it's just coming out of me. And turning it into some humor. There's a song that says, sometimes when we fight, I like to make you laugh. And that's part of it, is because you're just trying to create some humor just to lift it a little bit. Because remember, all of those emotions elicit chemicals in our body. And so you can't have the anger chemicals and the humor chemicals at the same time. And so if you coexist, humor, it's going to pull you out of some of that anger state.
That's right. And the other thing about humor is don't take yourself so seriously.
Right.
Okay, why should things always go your way?
Right.
Why are you the only person no, just ease up, okay? chill, chill. You know, develop a sense of humor about yourself. Come on. I'm taking myself a little too seriously right now.
Yeah, I'm feeling like I'm a little bit too important.
Right.
A couple of other ways to deal with anger is changing your environment. Certainly if you're, my goodness, if it's midnight on Christmas Eve and you're putting that bike together and you're getting frustrated, walk away from it. Just put it down and come back to it in a little bit, or come back to it the next morning, or
Right.
leave it and say, hey, I guess this is a do-it-yourself project that was left by old Chris Kringle, and we're gonna have to put it together.
Part of the gift is he wants us to spend some time together.
But again, that brings in some humor, that changes your environment.
Right.
It changes what's going on time-wise, because sometimes anger is elicited because we feel like we're under timing pressure or under the pressure of doing something right now. And so
Right.
sometimes avoiding those kinds of issues it can help resolve anger.
Yeah, I tell kids all the time when they start to feel themselves getting angry, or parents or children, go to another room. Just move to another room. Doesn't have to be a bedroom. Doesn't matter. There's something in this environment that's producing these emotions. So change the environment.
Yeah.
Go someplace else. And while you're there, you're not going to be stimulated by whatever's going on in that environment. It might be another person. It might be the bright lights are too bright, the TV's on too loud. So move to another location, and frequently that will help you calm back down.
Yeah, and I guess the last one that I would mention is just anticipatory.
Right.
There are lots of times when you just know you're going to get angry. It's like, that particular coworker driving on I-4 on the interstate. There's certain areas around here that that you're going to get stuck in traffic for no reason, absolutely no reason at all. It makes absolutely no sense to me, but it's going to make you angry. So prepare for that.
Right.
Listen to music that keeps you calm. Talk to somebody on the Bluetooth and stuff, but talk to somebody on the phone that is going to help keep you calm. Just do something in anticipation for those times that you're likely to get angry, to minimize and to decrease the likelihood.
You mentioned I-4. One of the recurring discussions in my family is the drive to the Tampa airport.
Yeah.
Because that's a drive that can take 45 minutes or 2 hours.
Right.
And you never know. So if you have a plane to catch, then you better leave yourself the maximum. You better figure it could take me 2 hours or more to get to the airport. And I would rather wait in the airport than on my car on I-4.
Right.
Because then waiting in the airport doesn't produce any emotions. I can read a magazine, I can shop, I can look around, I can talk to people, but I can stay calm, stay relaxed. If I'm in my car on I-4, I'm going to get aroused and probably angry at the stupid drivers who are causing the delay.
Right.
Not there.
Yeah.
So avoid if you can.
Absolutely. So,
and then there are 3 other little things.
Yeah.
Kind of little tips. One is timing. You said earlier, don't have these discussions late at night. Okay. If you're tired and you tend to be a little more emotional, and then don't try to have a discussion at night. There are other people who don't want to have a discussion in the morning. I'm not a morning person, they'll tell you. And so I don't want to do this in the morning. Okay. So timing is very important. Avoidance is very important. We talked earlier about clean your room. Sometimes it's better just to close the door. If that room bothers you that much, then close the door so that you're not triggered by that messy room. You'll clean it eventually. But in the meantime, close the door. Avoid the thing that's causing the reaction. And then the third thing is finding alternatives. If you are bothered by this drive, you used to drive every day, didn't you? To the USF, and you always had to do it in rush hour. Right. You had to go morning rush hour and nighttime rush hour, right? And so you have to, that it's going to happen. So you find some alternative, either an alternative route. There's a back road somewhere. I've never
Right.
I've only taken it a couple of times, but some people will take that back road, and it's a more pleasant drive. It's not, it may not be faster, but it's a more pleasant drive. So
Right.
you find an alternative to the thing that bothers you.
Right. Absolutely. So there's a variety of ways for dealing with our anger. And so as we kind of pull all this together, right, we need to recognize that we all have anger.
Right.
Everybody experiences anger. So it should never be the goal to not get angry, because that's a futile goal.
That's right.
Because anger is an adaptive evolutionary response to things. And so it happens today, because of so many things that are going on in our life, and oftentimes because of the way that we're raised, anger has become this blanket emotion that is used in so many circumstances that it absolutely has no reason to exist. But we just readily go to it. And so it has become this blanket emotion.
Right.
And then finally, recognizing that we get angry, let's find some ways to manage it. We listed several different strategies there. But again, one of the best is just to sit back and try to figure out what the real emotion is, and deal with that emotion instead of anger.
That's right. Now we're going to include in the show notes, we're going to include one of the articles that has these various strategies. Okay. And if you're struggling with anger, and most of us do, or if you're struggling with somebody else who's got anger issues, okay, you can read these things. On the other hand, if that isn't sufficient, you can meet with a therapist who can do, and the therapist is essentially going to do two things. They're going to give you strategies to use, but the therapist should also help you understand yourself better, to know why you're having this experience, or at least why you're expressing your anger the way you do. So it should be a two-part process. It should be, these are the techniques, but let's talk about why you're reacting the way you are. Let's understand that anger is a blanket emotion, and we need to get to these real feelings. And that's where you're going to get some real substantial long-term help. So it's always a two-part process.
Absolutely. So, all right, well, check out those articles in the show notes and get that additional help if needed. So, well, I think that's it for today. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.